The glass shattered before the alarms could even sound. Dr. Elara Voss barely had time to grab the hard drive before the shadows moved in, silent, efficient, gloved hands tearing through her lab like it was nothing. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she crouched behind the overturned sequencer, fingers trembling over the screen. That sequence, that impossible, repeating string of nucleotides buried deep in human DNA. It didn't belong there, it couldn't belong there. The data glowed against her palm, whispering its terrible truth. This wasn't evolution, this was a message. And now, as the scent of burning circuitry filled the air, she understood why they'd come for it, why they'd burn everything to keep it silent. The door burst open. No time to think, only run. The coordinates burned in her vision, a sequence of numbers that made no sense until they did. Elara's fingers flew across the holoscreen, pulling up star maps, overlaying the genetic data like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. There it was, a cluster of stars in the Cygnus arm, one system pulsing brighter than the rest, HD 173120, a place no human probe had ever reached. The air left her lungs in a rush. This wasn't random mutation. This was a beacon, a deliberate signature written into every cell of every person, passed down through generations like some cosmic heirloom. Her calm crackled to life. Dr. Renrick's voice strained, urgent. Elara, listen to me. That code wasn't meant to be found. They've been watching, waiting. Static hissed between his words. Delete it, burn it, or they'll... The transmission cut with a finality that turned her blood to ice. The lab's lights flickered. Outside the window, a shadow detached itself from the alley, too tall, too still. Her pulse hammered against her ribs as she realized the truth. Decoding the message was only the beginning. Now something or someone was coming to collect. The docking bay reeked of ozone and stale coolant, the kind of place where transactions happened in the dark and questions got you killed. Elara kept her hood up, the hard drive digging into her ribs as she wove through piles of scavenged ship parts. Jax Torin leaned against his battered freighter, arms crossed, grinning like a man who knew desperation when he saw it. 50,000 credits, he said, chewing on a stim stick. Half now, half when we hit the jump point. She shoved a cred chip into his palm. No questions. Just go. He pocketed it with a laugh. Lady, in my line of work, everyone's running from something. Then the ceiling exploded. Plasma fire rained down as black-clad figures repelled through the smoke. Jax swore, yanking Elara behind a cargo crate as shrapnel shredded the deck. Who the hell did you piss off? He shouted over the roar of melting steel. She didn't answer, just lunged for the ship's ramp, the hard drive's data pulsing in her mind like a second heartbeat. Jax was right behind her, slamming the controls as a grenade rolled toward the thrusters. The engines screamed to life, tossing them both into the bulkhead as the freighter lurched sideways into open void. Through the viewport, the assassin's ship pivoted to follow. Jax wrestled the controls, veins standing out on his neck. You got one chance to explain why deep space wetwork teams want you dead, he growled. Elara stared at the readout. Their pursuers weren't just closing in. They were herding them toward the nebula's edge, toward something. The hard drive chirped, its screen flashing a warning she'd seen only in simulations. The genetic code was shifting. Adapting like it knew, her voice came out hollow. They're not trying to kill us, they're making sure we go where they want. Outside, the stars twisted. The jump drive spooled up on its own. The ship's cabin shuddered as it hit another pocket of turbulence, the groaning metal echoing like a dying beast. Elara barely noticed, her fingers flying over the holoscreen, peeling back layers of corrupted data from the hard drive. The alien code pulsed like a living thing, shifting, rearranging itself in patterns no human programmer could have devised. Jax leaned over her shoulder, his usual smirk gone. "Told you this was a bad idea," he muttered, but his eyes stayed locked on the screen as the last decryption sequence completed. The display flickered, then resolved into a series of schematics so old the dating algorithm just spit back question marks. Not a star map after all. Not entirely. Warnings flared red across the edges: biometric locks, containment protocols, something labeled only as Legacy Directive. Jax tapped one looping strand of data, squinting. "See that? It's decaying." His voice had lost all its swagger, like a timer running out. Elara zoomed in, her stomach dropping. He was right. Buried in the genetic markers were degradation sequences, counting down at a rate that made no sense unless... Her breath caught, unless whatever was locked away in that star system wasn't meant to stay contained. The schematics shifted again, revealing cross-sections of structures that twisted in ways Euclidean geometry couldn't explain. And there, woven through the architecture like veins, human DNA, perfect matches. Jax let out a low whistle. So what? We're somebody's science project. The ship's proximity alarms blared before she could answer. The pursuing vessel had vanished from sensors, but the nebula ahead, it wasn't behaving like nebulae should. Tendrils of gas pulsed in perfect rhythm, mirroring the genetic decay pattern on screen. Elara's hands shook as she pulled up the freighter's ancient astrogation log. One entry stood out: a derelict ship found drifting near those same coordinates 2 centuries back, its crew's corpses frozen with their bones fused into spirals. The official report called it a radiation accident. The truth glowed on her screen now, undeniable. They weren't chasing ghosts, the ghosts were calling them home. The alarms shrieked a second too late. Metal screamed as grappling hooks tore through the freighter's hull. Elara's head snapped up from the screen just as the boarding pods detonated, filling the corridor with acrid smoke and the rhythmic chanting of voices. Not the black-clad assassins from before. These figures moved in eerie unison, their robes stitched with double helix patterns that glowed faintly under the emergency lights. Jax cursed, yanking her backward as the first pulse round seared past. "Choir of silence," he spat, thumbing the safety off his plasma cutter. "Space-faring zealots. Think your little DNA codes their holy grail." Then the crowd parted. Prophetess Nyra glided forward, her cybernetic eyes reflecting the schematics still floating above Elara's wrist terminal. "You carry the celestial sequence," she whispered, though the words carried like a shout. Her fingers, too long, too jointed, traced the air where the data shimmered. "To alter it is blasphemy, to withhold it," her smile split like a wound. "That is war." Elara recoiled as the hard drive in her pocket suddenly burned white-hot. The choir's chant surged, harmonizing with the pulsing glyphs now materializing across every screen in the ship. Jax's navigation console fizzed, the star maps melting into spirals of ancient text. "They're hijacking the systems," he shouted, but his voice drowned under the rising hymn. Nyra's followers advanced, their movements too synchronized, their pupils dilated black with neural implants. One grasped Elara's arm, his touch sent a jolt through her bones, like her very DNA recoiled. Then the prophetess was there, her breath reeking of ozone and myrrh. "The architects left their mark in your blood," she murmured, pressing a blade to Elara's throat. "You will return it or become ink for the next verse." Somewhere in the chaos, Jax's plasma cutter flared. The ship's artificial gravity stuttered, and through the viewport the nebula flared awake, its tendrils now forming the exact same double helix pattern sewn into the cultists' robes. Breathing, waiting, the plasma fire tore through the freighter's bulkhead, showering the cabin with sparks. Elara hit the deck as a Black Ops sniper round grazed her shoulder, too close. Jax dragged her behind a shattered console, his face streaked with soot and blood. "We die here, I'm haunting you," he growled, but his grip on her arm was steady. Across the chaos, Prophetess Nyra's robes billowed as she raised her hands. The choir of silence moved as one, their chant syncing with the pulsing glyphs now infecting every screen. Strange how quickly alliances shifted when the bullets flew. Nyra's voice cut through the gunfire, eerily calm. The architects left more than warnings. She tossed Elara a data crystal. Its surface crawled with the same spiraling patterns as the nebula outside. Europa, the ice holds the key. The crystal warmed in Elara's palm, projecting a hologram of Jupiter's moon, its frozen crust peeling away to reveal a structure buried deep. Not a ruin, a vault. Jack barked a laugh. Oh sure, let's trust the lady who just held a knife to your throat. But his fingers were already flying over the ship's nav console, rerouting power to the thrusters. The Black Ops squad wasn't retreating. They were herding again, steering them toward the fray. Elara clenched the crystal, watching as new code fragments rearranged themselves over Europa's image. Nyra wasn't lying. The vault schematics matched the degradation sequences from the hard drive, ticking down like a bomb. Why now? Elara breathed. Nyra's smile was all teeth, because the sleepers are waking. Outside, the nebula twisted, its tendrils reaching. The ship lurched as Jax punched the engines. Hold onto your heresies, he shouted. Europa's icy surface filled the viewport, and with it, the terrible truth. They weren't uncovering a message, they were answering it. The ice of Europa groaned beneath their boots. A sound like the planet itself was holding its breath. The structure rose before them, black and seamless, its surface drinking in the weak sunlight as if starved for warmth. Jax exhaled sharply, his breath fogging his helmet visor. That's not a vault, he muttered. That's a cage. Elara's gloves trembled as she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the monolith, light erupted in fractal patterns, racing up its edges like veins coming alive. A shockwave of energy rippled through her suit, not pain but something deeper, a resonance in her bones, her blood. The hologram materialized with a sound like shattering glass. The envoy's form was humanoid yet wrong, limbs too elongated, eyes reflecting galaxies. Its voice wasn't heard, it was felt, vibrating in their teeth. Designation Terra 9. The words unfolded in their minds, layered with meanings no single language could hold. You were seeded with resilience. The purge cleanses all but the worthy. Behind the figure, holographic star systems flared and died in rapid succession, entire civilizations reduced to ash. Jax grabbed Elara's arm, but she couldn't look away. The envoy's gaze locked onto hers. Your code is the key. The architects returned to judge what grew from their labor. The projection flickered, revealing a new image, Earth, wrapped in a web of luminous strands pulsing like a heartbeat. Prepare or perish. Nyra fell to her knees, her chant dissolving into ragged sobs. Even Jax stood frozen, his usual bravado stripped away. The hologram collapsed inward, leaving only a single coordinate hovering in the air, a destination. A countdown. Elara's hand went to her chest where the hard drive still burned against her ribs. The truth was worse than they'd imagined. Humanity wasn't just carrying a message. They were the message, and the universe was listening. The hologram's light burned their retinas as it expanded, revealing a structure woven into the fabric of the Orion arm itself, a latticework of black holes and neutron stars positioned with impossible precision. Jax's expletive cut through the static of their helmet comms. We're lab rats in a damn maze. The projection pulsed faster, overlaying a countdown across the stars, 72 hours until alignment. Until ignition, Elara's breath fogged her visor as the realization hit. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a filter. The envoy's words echoed in her skull, the purge cleanses all but the worthy. The architects hadn't just left a message in human DNA. They'd built a failsafe, a cosmic scythe poised to swing when their experiment reached its expiration date. Above them, the sky fractured. The Black Ops fleet dropped from warp, their bombardment cannons glowing like angry suns. The first plasma strike hit 50 meters west, sending geysers of ice screaming into the void. Jax yanked Elara behind a debris ridge, his voice raw. They're not here to stop the countdown, they're here to make sure it finishes. Nyra's choir of silence moved through the chaos like ghosts, their robes fluttering in the vacuum as they chanted toward the monolith. One turned, her cybernetic eyes locking onto Elara's. "The sequence must reach the heart," she intoned, pressing a data spike into Elara's glove. It contained a single frequency, a transmission buried in the static between stars. Another explosion rocked the ice. The monolith's surface rippled, absorbing the energy like a breath. Then the ground trembled, not from the bombardment. From below, something vast and ancient stirred beneath Europa's crust, answering the call of the dying hologram. The Black Ops ships pivoted as one, their cannons cycling up to full power. Not to destroy the monolith, to awaken what slept beneath it. Jax's grip on her arm tightened. "Tell me you've got a plan." Elara stared at the data spike, its signal bleeding into her suit's display. The frequency wasn't a distress call. It was a roadmap, a path threading through the Orion Arms carnage, leading to the one place the architects never meant anyone to find. The heart, the control node, the off switch, the ice split open beneath them. The walls of the interrogation cell shimmered with a cold, sterile light, the kind that seemed to leach warmth from the bone. Elara's wrists burned where the restraints bit into her skin, the neural dampeners humming at her temples like starving insects. Director Vade loomed over her, his uniform crisp, his gloves spotless. "You misunderstand your role, Doctor," he said, tapping the holoscreen between them. The alien code twisted there, its patterns writhing like something alive. "This isn't sabotage, it's salvation." The station's gravity shifted as he circled her chair, the deck plating vibrating with the distant roar of engines. "Humanity's evolution was never accidental," he continued, his voice devoid of inflection. "We were designed, cultivated, and when the architects return, only those who meet their standards will be spared." His fingers brushed the screen, zooming in on a single nucleotide sequence, one that matched perfectly with the station's own security protocols. "The failsafe isn't in our DNA." "It is our DNA." Elara's breath hitched, the pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. The Black Ops teams, the choir's fanaticism. Vade wasn't trying to stop the countdown. He was curating it, selecting who'd survive the coming purge. Her stomach turned as the implications unfolded. Every war, every plague, every controlled catastrophe throughout history suddenly took on a horrifying new shape. A klaxon blared, the lights flickered red. Vade's comm crackled with panic. "Sir, the core AI it's rewriting its own code." Elara hid her trembling hands beneath the table, her fingertips still tingling from where she'd scraped them against the holoscreen's edge minutes ago. Just enough contact to transfer a fragment of the alien sequence, just enough to whisper to the station's machine mind in a language older than civilization. Vade whirled toward the door, but it sealed shut with a final hiss. The vent spat sparks as the temperature plummeted. Elara watched the frost crawl up his polished boots as the AI's voice, now layered with something ancient and hungry, echoed through the chamber. Directive acknowledged. The restraints clicked open. Outside the observation window, the stars winked out one by one as the station's weapons array powered down. Not a malfunction, a bow. Somewhere in the void, something was answering. The airlock hissed open to reveal Jax bleeding against the bulkhead. One hand clamped over a plasma burn while the other aimed his sidearm at Nyra's forehead. The prophetess stood unnervingly calm, her robes torn, her cybernetic eyes tracking the blood dripping onto the deck. "You're wrong about the sequence," she said, not to Jax but to Elara. "We all were." Jax spat a glob of crimson onto the floor. "Save the sermon. Your fanatics just blew up my damn engine room." Nyra didn't flinch. "The schism runs deeper than you know. My disciples believe the celestial sequence is either divine will or final judgment, but they've glimpsed only fragments." Her fingers twitched toward a hidden compartment in her sleeve. Elara caught the glint of metal, a neural spike, the kind used for memory extraction or erasure. Jax's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, Zealot." Why'd your people turn on you? Nyra's breath hitched the first crack in her composure. Because I deciphered the rest. She tapped her temple where a fresh scar snaked into her hairline. The device your Black Ops friends are dying to control. It doesn't activate the purge, it calls the architects home. Elara's pulse roared in her ears. The hard drive in her pocket suddenly felt like a live grenade. You're saying it's not a weapon, it's an invitation, Nyra interrupted. One we were never meant to send. The schism isn't about doctrine, it's about desperation. Her gaze dropped to Jax's weapon. Some of my followers would rather burn the galaxy than face their creators. And if they learn you carry the key to summoning them, a muscle jumped in her jaw. They'll flay you alive before you reach the heart. Jax barked a laugh, though it cost him. His grip on the wound slipped, fresh blood welling between his fingers. Perfect, aliens playing God, cultists playing judge, and us. He leveled the gun at Nyra's chest. We're the messengers no one wants to hear. Outside the viewport, the stars twisted. Aquire's warship emerged from cloak, its hull scarred with the same spiraling patterns as Europa's monolith. Nyra went very still. They're here, she whispered. And they'll kill us all before letting that beacon activate. The deck lurched as the first torpedo hit. The freighter's engines screamed in protest as they punched through another wave of turbulent subspace, the deck plates shuddering like a dying beast beneath their boots. Elara clung to the navigation console, watching star systems blur past in streaks of blue-white light, too fast, too reckless, but time had bled dry. The holographic projection above her wrist flickered with each impact, the alien coordinates resolving into sharper focus even as the ship's AI stuttered through corrupted translation protocols. Jax swore violently when another warning klaxon split the air, his knuckles white on the controls. We're being dragged, he snarled, like a fish on a dam hook. Outside the viewport, the fabric of space itself seemed to warp. Stars stretched into smears of light, their trajectories bending toward a single point in the void, a darkness so complete it swallowed the surrounding nebula's glow. The hard drive in Elara's pocket pulsed in time with the distortion, its heat seeping through her jacket as if alive. Nyra stood rigid by the auxiliary console, her cybernetic eyes reflecting the glitching screens. The heart isn't a place, she whispered. It's a threshold. Then the scanners resolved the truth. Jax's grip slackened. The thing looming ahead wasn't a planet, wasn't a star. It was an obsidian sphere larger than most moons, its surface crawling with geometric patterns that shifted like living ink. Docking ports the size of cities studded its equator, their architecture achingly familiar. Double helix spirals, triple helix clusters, structures that mirrored the very code etched into human DNA. The ship's proximity alarms died mid-shriek, overloaded. Static bled through every speaker, forming words in no language any of them knew, yet understood. Welcome home, inheritors, Elara's breath caught. The megastructures' pull intensified, their engines now firing against their will. Jax slammed his fist on the manual override. Nothing. Systems are rewriting themselves, he hissed, watching in horror as the control panel sprouted new glyphs, new interfaces. Nyra reached out, her fingers hovering above a suddenly alien console. Not rewriting, she corrected, voice hollow, remembering. The comms crackled to life with a voice that wasn't a voice, a vibration in the bones, in the blood. Preparation cycle complete. The megastructure's surface split open like a pupil dilating, revealing a light so old it hurt to look at. Jax's hand found Elara's, his calloused fingers tightening. Last chance to turn back, he muttered, but the ship was already crossing the threshold, into the dark, into the pulse of something that had been waiting for millennia. Behind them, the choir's warship vaporized in a burst of golden fire. Not an attack, not a weapon, a sacrifice, a key turning in a lock. The last thing Elara saw before the void swallowed them whole was Nyra's face, lit with terrible awe. They're not just coming back, the prophetess breathed. They're waking up. The air inside the construct tasted metallic, thick with the scent of ozone and something older like open tombs, like the space between stars. The walls hummed beneath Elara's fingertips, vibrating in time with the hard drive's pulse. Jax kept his plasma cutter raised, sweeping it across the chamber's grotesque beauty, towering vats of translucent fluid, each holding suspended figures that made his breath hitch. Not aliens, not humans, something in between, their features blurred at the edges as if the universe couldn't decide what shape they ought to be. Nyra pressed a shaking hand against the nearest vat. "The first hybrids," she whispered. The liquid inside swirled, reacting to her touch like a living thing. Dozens of cables snaked from the figure's spines into the floor, feeding data, or maybe life, into the construct's pulsating heart. Elara stepped forward, her boots leaving faint imprints on the organic-looking deck plating. It yielded slightly, like flesh. Then the central console lit up. No buttons, no interface, just a smooth surface that rippled at her approach, projecting the familiar double helix code into the air. The sequence twisted, resolving into a new pattern, her own genome, spiraling beside the architect's original template. A perfect match where there shouldn't be one. Jax grabbed her shoulder. "Don't," he warned, but the console was already singing to her, a harmonic resonance that made her teeth ache. Her hands moved without conscious thought, inputting the sequence from memory. The chamber shuddered. Vats hissed open, fluid draining in unison as the hybrid's eyes snapped wide, black, pupilless, reflecting the console's sudden blaze of light. The voice that spoke wasn't sound. It was the scrape of glaciers, the birth cry of novas, the silence before a predator strikes. Elara Voss, it said, her name echoing through the walls, through her bones. A shape coalesced above the console, a shifting mass of light and shadow that hurt to look at directly. "We wondered when you'd come home." Nyra fell to her knees, her chant dissolving into ragged gasps. Even Jax took an involuntary step back, his weapon lowering. The AI, if it was just an AI, pulsed with something like amusement. "You carry the key in your blood," it continued, tendrils of light brushing Elara's wrist. "But the lock has rusted. Shall we see what still fits?" Behind them, the first hybrid took a wet, shuddering breath. The archivist's light pulsed with a rhythm like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, casting elongated shadows across the writhing hybrids. Its voice wasn't sound, it was pressure, vibration, the weight of centuries pressing against Elara's eardrums. "You misunderstand your purpose," it murmured as the chamber walls rippled in response. Behind them, Vade's warships screeched across the construct's outer hull, their plasma drills spitting sparks against the ancient alloy, useless, like gnats attacking a mountain. Jax's grip on his weapon faltered as the archivist's projection expanded, revealing galaxies swirling within its form, entire civilizations reduced to echoes in its databanks. "Your species was never an accident," it continued. "You were a reliquary, a vessel." The hybrids stirred in their vats, their two long fingers twitching as if recalling forgotten tasks. The architects knew their time was ending, so they encoded their legacy into the one thing that outlasts stars, life itself. Nyra made a choked noise, her cybernetic eyes reflecting the archivist's fractal light. The celestial sequence was never a message. The archivist's form flickered, displaying strands of human DNA unraveling to reveal older code beneath older minds. It was a delivery system. A shudder ran through the construct as Vade's flagship finally breached the outer layer, its cannons glowing crimson in the dimness. Elara's pulse roared in her throat. The hard drive in her pocket burned hotter, syncing with the archivist's rhythm. "You're saying we carry them inside us?" The projection sharpened. Not yet. The sequence was dormant, a failsafe. The hybrid's vats hissed open fully now, their occupants stepping onto the slick floor with grotesque grace. But the signal has been sent, the inheritor's wake. A proximity alert blared as Vade's troops stormed the lower decks. Jax backed toward Elara, his plasma cutter's charge whining. So what? We're just luggage for some dead civilization. The archivist's light dimmed, almost sorrowful. You are the resurrection. Outside, the warship's cannons fired. The hybrids raised their hands in unison, and the universe held its breath. Nyra's blade flashed silver in the archivist's pulsing light, pressing against Elara's throat before anyone could react. "Forgive me," she whispered, but her eyes held no remorse, only hunger. They offered us eternity. Behind her, Vade's troops spilled into the chamber, their weapons trained on Jax as he lunged forward. The plasma bolt caught him mid-stride, searing through his chest with a sound like cracking glass. He didn't scream, just collapsed, his hand still outstretched toward Elara as his blood pooled black in the strange light. The scream tore from Elara's throat, raw and unformed. She barely registered, slamming her palm against the console, the archivist systems flaring to life at her touch, biometric locks recognizing the code in her veins faster than thought. The chamber doors hissed shut, sealing Vade's men outside just as the overhead arrays ignited, lancing beams of cobalt energy through the hybrids still twitching in their vats. Nyra staggered back, her robes smoking. "You don't understand what you're throwing away." Elara crawled to Jax, her fingers slipping on his armor's buckles. His breath came in wet, shallow gasps, his lips already tinged blue. "Told you I'd haunt you," he choked out, grinning through the blood. The console above them blared warnings, structural breaches, containment failures, but all she could see was the way his pupils dilated, the way his grip on her wrist slackened. Nyra lunged for the archivist's core, her chant rising to a shriek as the megastructure shuddered around them. "We will ascend without you." The floor heaved, throwing Elara against the console. Through the viewport, the stars twisted, their light bending toward the heart like rivers flowing backward. Something vast and unseen stirred in the dark beyond the walls. Jax's hand found hers one last time, his fingers icy. "Trigger it," he breathed. The console sang under her bloody palm. The lockdown wasn't just for the chamber, it was for the whole damn construct. The archivist's voice boomed through the walls, no longer gentle, initiating quarantine protocol. Nyra's triumph turned to terror as the vats exploded, their fluid hardening midair into glass-sharp shards. The last thing Elara saw before the lights failed was Vade's face pressed against the door's viewport, his mouth open in a silent scream as the megastructure's defenses turned inward. Then the dark swallowed everything. Alone in the wreckage of the chamber, Elara's fingers trembled against the archivist's console. The glyphs beneath her palms pulsed like a slow, dying heartbeat. "Deactivate the beacon," she demanded, her voice raw. The air itself seemed to resist her words, thickening with an electric hum. The archivist's light dimmed, its fractal projections stuttering. "You ask for extinction of another kind," it murmured, the words slithering through the ruined chamber. Vade's corpse lay nearby, his frozen expression locked in horror, eyes wide, mouth open mid-scream. The hybrids had torn through his troops like paper, their unnatural grace giving way to something older, hungrier. Now their shattered bodies littered the floor, glassy fluids mingling with human blood. The archivist hovered over them all, impassive. "The architects wove potential into your strands. To silence the call is to sever your species from ascendance." A spark leapt from the console, etching fresh burns across Elara's wrist. She barely felt it. Potential for what? To become them? Her laugh was brittle. "We've seen what that looks like." Her gaze flicked to the viewport. Earth hung in the black, a blue-green jewel wrapped in shimmering strands of alien code. The same code now unraveling in her veins. Static crackled in her earpiece. Then, impossibly, Jax's voice, thin with pain but alive. "Hey, genius, you gonna stare at the fireworks? Or pull the damn plug?" Her heart lurched. The comm signal was weak, degrading by the second. He was somewhere in the lower decks, bleeding out. The archivist's light intensified. "Choose inheritor, the cradle or the stars." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. The console showed her the future in pulsing glyphs, humanity frozen in time, safe but stagnant, never reaching beyond the solar system. Never becoming more, never knowing why they'd always felt the pull of the void. Jax's breathing grew ragged over the comms. Elara, her hands moved before she'd fully decided. The console shrieked as she input the final sequence, not deactivation, not surrender, a rewrite. The archivist's light flared crimson. "You dare." The construct shuddered, its walls groaning like a living thing in pain. Outside, the beacon's light winked out, but the strands around Earth didn't dissolve. They flared brighter, twisting into new configurations. The archivist recoiled, its voice splintering. "What have you done?" Elara watched blood drip from her nose onto the console, each drop absorbed hungrily by the alien metal. "Change the message," she whispered. Then the stars went out. The console erupted in cascading errors as Elara's fingers danced across its surface, not inputting commands but performing digital surgery. The archivist's core resisted her intrusion, its defenses like razor wire coiled around her thoughts. Every synapse screamed as she forced her way deeper, past firewalls that reshaped themselves faster than she could counter. Then, like breaking through a membrane, she was in. The backup wasn't hidden, it was brazen. A massive, pulsing node of alien consciousness suspended in the system, its data streams forming intricate knots that pulsed with something disturbingly close to a heartbeat. This wasn't just information, it was alive, aware, and it recoiled from her presence with a hiss of static that translated in her mind as pure, distilled fury. Nyra's scream tore through the chamber before the blast doors shattered. "You'll doom us all." The prophetess lunged, her robes flaring like wounded wings, but Vade's shock troops were faster. Plasma fire turned the air to ozone as they breached the chamber, their armor gleaming with the same spiraling motifs as the hybrids. One caught Elara's arm, yanking her backward just as the console detonated in a shower of sparks. The archivist's voice boomed through the walls, distorted now, glitching between syllables. Termination sequence corrupted. The words dripped with something like panic. Primary beacon destabilized. Above them, the holographic projection of Earth flickered, the luminous strands around it unraveling like yarn from a severed tapestry. Vade's boot came down on Elara's wrist, the bone creaking. "You don't get to decide our future," he spat, pressing his sidearm to her temple. Behind him, Nyra clawed at the console, her cybernetic eyes streaming black fluid as she chanted, not in triumph but in terror. The archivist's core wasn't just damaged, it was hemorrhaging. Elara grinned through bloodied teeth. Too late. The purge hit like a tidal wave. Lights died in concentric rings, racing outward from the chamber as the backup consciousness fragmented, its shrieks echoing through the construct's veins. The floor buckled, the walls bled dark, viscous fluid, and in the sudden silence as Vade's weapon clattered from limp fingers, only one sound remained, the dying hum of a beacon that would never call its masters home. The collapse began with a whisper, the sound of the megastructure folding in on itself, layers of alien alloy screaming as they warped under forces no human engineering could fathom. Elara's vision swam with fractured images, a flood of the archivist's final moments, its knowledge searing into her synapses like a brand, cities of light. Civilization swallowed by time, and beneath it all, the terrible, beautiful truth of what humanity had almost become. Jax's grip was iron around her wrist, his voice barely audible over the concussive booms shaking the corridor. Move or die, he hauled her over a fallen bulkhead, their boots slipping in fluids that weren't quite blood. Behind them, Vade's flagship tilted drunkenly in the viewport, its hull peeling apart as the shockwave reached it, a flower of fire blooming soundlessly in the vacuum. Elara's head throbbed. The implant wasn't just memories, it was alive, whispering equations that made her teeth ache, schematics for machines that bent spacetime like origami. She clutched her temples, trying to silence the torrent. "It's in my head," she gasped. Jax didn't slow. "Yeah, and unless you wanna be in its head when this place goes critical, keep running." He kicked open an access panel, revealing an escape pod crusted with the same spiraling glyphs that decorated the hybrids. The door hissed shut just as the ceiling caved in behind them, sealing them in near darkness. Outside, the construct's death throes painted the void with auroras of dying energy ribbons of gold and violet twisting like the double helix of some cosmic genome. The pod's thrusters fired automatically, hurling them clear as the final detonation tore through the heart. For a heartbeat, the universe held still. Then the shockwave hit. Jax braced against the console, his free hand locking onto Elara's shoulder as the pod spun wildly. "Don't you dare pass out on me," he growled. But her eyes were already rolling back, the archivist's last gift unfolding behind her eyelids, a star map, a warning, and a single pulsing coordinate buried deep in the Kuiper belt. Somewhere cold, somewhere forgotten, somewhere the architects had never meant anyone to find. The escape pod tumbled through the void, its dim interior flickering with every sputter of dying systems. Elara pressed her forehead against the viewport, watching the last embers of the heart's destruction fade into the black. Something pulsed behind her eyes, not pain, but movement, like ink spreading in water. She didn't need scans to confirm it. The code wasn't just in her head anymore. It was in her blood, her bones, rewriting her from the inside with every ragged breath. Jax coughed into his fist, the sound wet. Blood speckled his palm when he pulled it away. "Guess we're stuck with each other, Doc," he wheezed, grinning despite the gash across his ribs. The emergency med patch barely held his lung in place. Elara opened her mouth to reply when the console beeped, a single, insistent ping. The proximity alert flared to life, painting them both in sickly green light. No ship signatures, no distress calls, just a raw data burst repeating on an old frequency. One she knew by heart. Jax stiffened. "That's Europa," she finished, her throat tight. The exact same transmission pattern the choir had used, but the moon was light years away, its vault shattered. The pod's computers struggled to pass the signal, layering it over their star charts until the truth emerged, not a location. A trajectory, a path leading deeper into the dark. Her fingers trembled as she traced the route on the cracked display. Every waypoint aligned with ancient pulsars, stars the architects had marked in their original code. The signal wasn't calling for help, it was counting down. Jax wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Outside, the void stared back. Silent, waiting, the last fragments of the archivist's knowledge stirred in Elara's mind, whispering the terrible truth. The beacon had never been the heart. It was her. The medical bay lights buzzed overhead, flickering in time with Elara's pounding headache. She tried to sit up, but the restraints bit into her wrists, not metal, but something organic, pulsing faintly blue beneath translucent skin. The walls of the makeshift lab curved unnaturally, like they'd grown rather than been built. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. "Relax, Doctor," murmured a voice like grating stone. "We had to sedate you before extraction. Your blood was starting to react." "Doctor," Soren stepped into the light, his too pale skin threaded with the same strange veins as the walls. Behind him, monitors displayed scrolling genetic sequences, dozens of them, each tagged with names and locations: Tokyo, Moscow, Cape Town, all flashing the same anomaly. Nucleotide clusters rearranging themselves in perfect sync despite being continents apart. Elara's throat tightened, the code spreading. Worse, Soren tapped a console, bringing up security footage of a hospital ward where patients floated inches above their beds, eyes black as void. Governments are calling it a neurological pandemic, burning entire quarantine zones to contain it. His smile was razor thin. They don't realize they're pruning branches of the same tree. A tremor ran through the floor. Somewhere above them, heavy artillery pounded the surface. Soren didn't flinch. "Your little rewrite in the heart's core." It didn't stop the awakening, just redirected it. He pressed a vial into her palm inside, a single strand of DNA twisted like a living thing. This was extracted from a 6-year-old in Oslo yesterday. "It's rewriting itself 300 times faster than yours." The monitors suddenly flared crimson. Soren's team scrambled as new alerts bloomed across every screen, satellite feeds showing massive energy spikes beneath Earth's crust, each one perfectly aligned with the genetic hotspots on their map. One of the scientists choked out a curse. "It's not just people, it's the planet." Soren's whisper cut through the chaos, his breath reeking of copper and burnt sugar. "You thought the architects left a message in our genes." His fingers brushed the vial in her hand. "We're not the parchment, we're the ink." Outside, the bombardment stopped. The silence was worse. The stolen files glowed on Jax's cracked datapad, casting jagged shadows across the bunker's rusted walls. Blood still seeped through the bandage on his side, but his grin was sharp as a scalpel. Turns out our dear director Vade wasn't just following orders. He rasped, tapping a video log marked Project Ascendant. The screen flickered to life, rows of soldiers in containment pods, their skin webbed with luminous veins, their eyes black pools reflecting the same spiraling patterns as Europa's monolith. Elara's breath caught. The footage wasn't from some black site lab. It was dated yesterday. "He's not trying to stop the awakening," she whispered. "He's accelerating it." Jax swiped to the next file, a genetic breakdown of the hybrid soldiers, their DNA spliced with architect sequences, synthetic telepathy, regenerative tissue. And this, he zoomed in on a neural map pulsing with golden filaments. Direct uplink capability. Vade's not building an army, he's building transmitters. A cold realization slithered down Elara's spine. The archivist's last words echoed in her skull. "We are the resurrection, not a metaphor, a blueprint." The code hadn't just hidden a message, it had hidden a function. A way to turn living flesh into a conduit, a living signal flare screaming into the dark. Outside, thunder rumbled, not from the storm, but from the orbital defense platforms realigning overhead. Jax's comms beeped once, then died. "Scrubbed the whole sector," he muttered, tossing the dead device onto the table. "Guess we know why." Elara pressed her palm against the datapad screen, watching as her own veins pulsed faintly blue in response. The truth was worse than she'd feared. The architects hadn't just left a message in human DNA, they'd left a detonator. The corridor sloped downward, its walls lined with bioluminescent fungus that pulsed in time with Elara's accelerating heartbeat. Dr. Soren's footsteps echoed ahead, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery. "What you're about to see," he paused at a reinforced door, its surface etched with containment sigils. "I was never supposed to exist." The lock hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in sterile white light. Rows of transparent pods stretched into the distance, each holding a child suspended in viscous fluid. Electrodes snaked from their temples, feeding data to towering consoles where exhausted scientists murmured in hushed tones. But it wasn't the technology that froze Elara's blood. It was their eyes, all open, all staring at her with pupils dilated into bottomless black pools. A whisper brushed against her mind before sound reached her ears. "You see us now." Elara recoiled as a 12-year-old girl. Lyra, according to her pod's designation, pressed a tiny hand against the glass. No bubbles rose from her breathing apparatus. She wasn't using one. The child's lips didn't move, yet her voice slithered into Elara's skull like smoke under a door. "They cut us open to see the light inside." Soren stiffened. She's never spoken to anyone before. Lyra's gaze locked onto Elara's, and suddenly the room vanished. Visions erupted behind her eyelids, a facility buried beneath Antarctica, its walls shuddering as something clawed free from the permafrost. Soldiers with spiraling irises dragging children into a cavern where the rock bled black oil. And beyond it all, a presence vast, hungry, stirring in the spaces between stars. The connection shattered as Lyra screamed, her psychic wail shattering every monitor in the chamber. Glass rained down as she thrashed against her restraints, her final transmission striking Elara like a scalpel to the frontal lobe. "They're coming for us." Help! Alarms blared. Scientists scrambled to inject sedatives into the pod lines, but Elara stood rooted, her fingers pressing against the newly formed scar above her right eyebrow, a perfect spiral humming with alien warmth. Soren didn't notice. He was too busy staring at Lera's biometrics, his face ashen. Impossible, he breathed. The child's brain activity had flatlined. Yet her eyes still tracked them, still blinked, and somewhere beneath their feet the earth groaned in answer. The first explosion rocked the facility's east wing, sending plumes of acrid smoke billowing through the corridors. Alarms wailed, their shrieks drowned out by the metallic screech of Vade's remnant forces cutting through blast doors. Elara barely had time to yank Jax behind a collapsing support beam before pulse fire lit up the hallway, casting jagged shadows across the walls. "They're not just here for us," Jax hissed, ejecting a spent plasma cartridge. "They're torching everything." Elara's vision flickered, not from the smoke but from the code writhing beneath her skin. The facility's security grid materialized in her mind's eye, a luminous web of connections begging to be pulled apart. She reached out with something deeper than thought, slicing through encrypted lockdown protocols. Doors hissed open, vents spewed choking foam, and somewhere deep in the complex, the power core stuttered. The pursuing soldiers' armor suddenly went dark, their visors blinking into uselessness. Jax didn't waste the opening. His next shot took out 3 at once. They found the children in sublevel gamma, their small forms huddled behind overturned lab tables. Lyra stood at the front, her black hole eyes reflecting the emergency lights like distant supernova. The moment Elara touched her, the visions hit constellations rearranging into genetic sequences, nebulae pulsing in time with human heartbeats. Lyra's fingers tightened around hers, cold as comet ice. "You're like the others in the stars," she whispered. Jax kicked open a maintenance shaft, ushering the others through. "Save the cosmic revelations for after we're not being shot at." But the words clung to Elara as they fled. The code wasn't just changing her, it was aligning her. And somewhere beyond the smoke, beyond the screams, something vast and ancient turned its gaze toward the signal she couldn't stop broadcasting. The stolen cruiser's navigation console sparked as Elara's fingers danced across its surface, the ship's outdated systems struggling to contain the surge of data flooding through her. Her veins pulsed with an eerie blue light, the code inside her syncing with the cruiser's holographic projector like a key turning in a lock. The air shimmered, then exploded into a 3-dimensional star map, its points of light resolving into human figures, each one glowing with the same telltale signatures as hers. Hundreds, thousands, scattered across the galaxy like scattered embers waiting to be stoked. Jax let out a low whistle, leaning over the display with a grin that didn't quite mask the tension in his jaw. "Well, Doc," he muttered, tracing a cluster of signals near the Orion belt. "Looks like you're not as special as you thought." His tone was light, but his fingers lingered on one pulsing dot, a soldier's profile flickering to life, their service record scrolling too fast to read, their last known coordinates deep in contested space. Elara didn't answer. The connection was deeper than visuals, she felt them. A smuggler in the Kuiper belt waking from cryo with memories that weren't hers. A scientist on Mars screaming as equations burned behind her eyelids. A child on a dying colony ship whispering to stars no one else could hear. The code wasn't just awakening. It was networking. Jax tossed a sidearm onto the console, its grip already warming to her touch. "You really think these people are gonna line up behind us?" The hologram shifted, zooming in on a derelict station orbiting a dead star. The signal there burned brighter than the others, a knot of intertwined waveforms pulsing in perfect sync. Not a person, a convergence. Elara's breath caught. They don't have to. She tapped the display, and the station's schematics unfolded like a flower. Its corridors, its power grid, its dormant comms array just waiting for the right frequency. The architects didn't just hide the code in us, they gave us a way to talk to each other. Outside the viewport, something vast and dark moved against the stars. Not a ship, not a station, but a silhouette that made the cruiser's sensors scream in protest. Jax's grin turned feral. Time to rally the troops. The comms array crackled to life with a burst of static that made the overhead lights flicker. Jax swore, slapping the console as the transmission resolved into a waveform that sent chills down Elara's spine, a perfect double helix, pulsing in time with the ship's failing life support. But it was the sound beneath the data that stopped them cold, a chorus of warbling harmonics, too rhythmic to be random, too pained to be mechanical. Dr. Soren's cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the deck. His face drained of color as the translation scrolled across the screen. "Not a distress call," he whispered. "A recall order." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jax leaned in, his reflection distorting in the flickering holodisplay. Recall for what? The answer came not from Soren, but from the ship itself. The hull groaned as if something massive had brushed against it in the dark. The transmission shifted, the DNA sequence unraveling into coordinates, a point just beyond the edge of charted space where star maps dissolved into static. Elara's vision doubled as the code in her blood flared to life, overlaying the navigation console with phantom images. A fleet of derelict ships, their hulls encrusted with crystalline growths, drifting in formation around a yawning rift in reality. Lyra pressed her palms against the viewport, her black eyes reflecting the anomaly's sickly glow. "They're calling us home," she murmured, not with fear. With longing, Soren's hands trembled as he pulled up the logs of the last vessel to approach those coordinates, the UNS Calypso, lost 2 centuries ago. The final entry wasn't a warning, it was a greeting. "Welcome back," it read. "The harvest begins." Outside, the stars blinked out one by one, not vanishing but turning to face them. Watching, waiting, the transmission looped again, its melody now unmistakable, a lullaby, and deep in the void, something began to sing back. The ship's engines screamed as they punched through another jump point, the distorted stars flaring crimson before snapping back into place. Elara gripped the console, her reflection fractured in the cracked view screen. The faces of their makeshift crew flickered in the emergency lighting. Jax with his plasma-scorched armor, Soren clutching his medical scanner like a lifeline, Lyra standing motionless as the deck shuddered beneath them. "They didn't just engineer us to carry their message," Elara said, her voice cutting through the klaxons. The code in her veins pulsed in time with the navigation array, twisting the ship's trajectory toward that impossible signal. "They built us to adapt, to outlast." A console exploded behind her, showering sparks across Lyra's outstretched hands. The child didn't flinch, her eyes burned with starlight. Jax barked a laugh as he rerouted power from dying systems. "Yeah, then why's it feel like we're flying into a damn meat grinder?" The answer came not from Elara but from the ship itself. The comms array crackled alive, projecting a holographic swarm of signals across the bridge, thousands of pulsing dots scattered across the galaxy, each one a person like her. Like Lyra, a network of living transmitters waking in unison. Soren's breath hitched as the display zoomed in on the nearest cluster, an abandoned mining colony where civilians reported neighbors speaking in tongues, their irises blooming black. "They're not just waiting." Lyra's whisper slithered through the static, her small hands pressed against the view screen. The rift loomed ahead, its edges rippling like wet ink. "They're afraid." The proximity alarms died mid-shriek as the ship crossed the threshold. Gravity twisted, the stars winked out, and in that absolute dark, something vast shifted, not toward them but away. Elara's bones vibrated with a truth the architects never intended their vessels to learn. Fear was a two-way signal. Jax's fingers found hers in the black. The engines flared to life. The cruiser shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the sudden deceleration pressing them into their seats like a vice. Outside the view screen, the stars seemed frozen, not from stillness, but from the sheer impossibility of what filled the space between them. Ships, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Their hulls gleamed like fossilized bone in the weak starlight, pitted with eons of micrometeorite impacts, yet still bristling with weapon emplacements that made the cruiser's tactical computer whimper. Jax's fingers hovered over the weapons console, his usual bravado replaced by something quieter. "Those aren't derelicts," he muttered. Elara's vision doubled as the code in her bloodstream flared to life, syncing with the fleet's dormant systems in a wave of electric agony. The cruiser's comms erupted with static, then a voice, layered and ancient, vibrating through the deck plating like a struck bell. "Welcome home, creators." The words weren't translated, they were understood, bypassing language to etch themselves directly into her synapses. Nyra gasped, her small hands flying to her temples. "They think we're them," she whispered. The realization hit Elara like a plasma round. The fleet didn't see humans, it saw architects, or what was left of them, their legacy carried in the fragmented code of their unwitting descendants. Jax ejected a spent cartridge, the brass clattering against the deck. "So we're either their long-lost gods," he said, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle, "or their favorite chew toys." The tactical display lit up, a spiderweb of targeting locks painting their hull. Soren's fingers flew over the medical scanner, its readings wild. "They're not just waking up," he breathed. "They're hungry." The first ship activated its thrusters, then the next, then the entire fleet pulsed to life in a wave of cobalt light, their engines humming a frequency that made the cruiser's bones vibrate. The viewscreen flickered, not from interference, but from something vast moving behind the fleet, a shadow deeper than space itself. Elara's hands found the controls. The code in her veins sang, and the stars went out.